Among the things that I want to tell you about why I am here, it's that for the last 4 years, I've been working with Biennale College Cinema VR, because as you know, the festival of Biennale is the first festival in the world to have organized a competition for VR projects. And as well, the same organization produces 1, 2/3 projects per year. Low budget, but nonetheless. Today, let's say that VR has not reached high peaks as Hollywood movies. This is what entitles me to talk a little bit about that, because it's a reality which is very new. So there are not many certainties, a few there are. And those are the ones I will ask you to talk about together. If you want to intervene, you're welcome. I'm not a frontal person. I like to interact with you if you have questions or objections, which are welcome. But before getting into virtual reality, the title of this meeting was The New Forms of Narration. This is what I'm really interested in. I care for the shape that storytelling, in particular the audiovisual storytelling, takes. And it has been changing a lot. Narration, of course, also is a matter of contents, and we as a species have, since ever, in our DNA, the need for stories. Why? Usually the answers this question is given are two. One, stories in their form are useful to nail down experience. And that is true. And this is a word that will come back when we'll talk about virtual reality. Two, it gives us, these are the more metaphysical theorists of narration, it's because it gives, in its form of beginning, middle, end, it gives us the sense of our finiteness, that we are going to die. And it helps in creating stories that start out, then develop, then reach a peak in the middle, and then go to close. It gives a form to, in terms of structure, to our way of thinking that tells us indirectly that we are gonna finish, as the story do. What about the shape of storytelling? It has changed a lot. I want to do with really broad strokes, just our adventure in storytelling, because it has passed a lot of time since, around the fire, there were a group of people sitting and listening to the storyteller. There was no technology, actually there was words. That was the first technology we used. Then we developed a little bit, and we added to the words, the vocal, oral tradition, the writing. Then the printing came. And then I'm jumping centuries like a goat. And we get up until the radio time. There is the printing. The next big step in communication in terms of storytelling is the radio. Radio is born as the storyteller, and it added up news and, you know, any kind of genre that we have learned to know through radio. After that, cinema came. And that is where I was born, because I am in this business because I fell in love with a movie. I won't tell you which one is it, but if you ask, I will tell you. And to get it closer to our time, we have to mention necessarily television. Television has been the explosion of storytelling. If we focus on the last 30 years, things have changed radically. What happens in the last 30 years? Happens what usually today, if you go around in the world, usually there is one recurring couple of terms. They walk together, and it's an improper use of these terms. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I should have thought about it before. So these two terms are paradigm shift. Paradigm shift is a term that Thomas Kuhn, a physicist, a historian of physics, used for the first time when he wrote a memorable book that I invite you all to read, which is The Structure of Scientific Revolution, in which we depicted a pattern of change from one paradigm, for example, Ptolemaic paradigm, the Earth is at the center, to another paradigm, Galileo and Copernico paradigm, where the sun is at the center. Then we know that this is not true, but from we are the center of the universe, up to we are just one of the planets going around the sun. It is a change in self-perception. And that is a paradigm shift. I'm not necessarily the center of the universe. There are 2 or 3 moments in terms of paradigm shift. They are called usually the humanity wounds. 3 of them. One is the one I just mentioned, the shift from Ptolemaic to Copernicus, Galileo paradigm. The other one is we were created directly by God. No? The Bible, this is what the Bible says. And even if we watch at the Sistine Chapel, we see that by blowing, God creates us. But there is a guy who elaborated a theory because he realizes experimentally, scientifically, that probably there are beings, animals, that are very similar to us, and we share a lot of them. Darwin changes another paradigms. We are not created probably in the image of God. We are descending from the monkeys. Third wound, even worse. You are in control of your life. You make decision. A guy arrives and says, maybe not. Maybe it's not true. Maybe if you sleep 8 hours a day, average, you don't know anything about what happens in those 8 hours. So at least 1/3 of your life is not under your control. Not only that, but that part is completely influencing the second part. The one when you think to be aware, but subconsciously, that part when you dream through influences your life, vigilant life. Why am I saying this? Because what happens today in the audiovisual landscape is something of this kind. We are so much used to a paradigm in which there is one narrator, in this case me, and all listeners, like this, sitting and communicating, interacting with me psychologically. This is what we do when we go to the movies. This is what we do when you watch a TV series. When we binge walk, we're absorbed into the series, into the world of the series. Progressively, with the development and the changing of the technological landscape, technology has always had a huge part in the shape of storytelling. The landscape has changed. You know everything about it. Internet, and then digitalization, and then more and more technology of the same kind in depth. There was a moment, let's say, let's go broad strokes, that is if you are cinema lovers, you know that at a certain point, cinema was watching with a highbrow television stuff. They were saying, yeah, television, little stuff. We have to wait 1999, 20 years ago. For the first time, New York Times says about The Soprano, masterpiece in literature. It's taking the place of literature because it's narration. Recognition of a new status of serial narration. After that, new masterpieces would come, and we know the title of them, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, run and see them, because they inform your imagery. Breaking Bad, and you have Mad Men, and you have Homeland, and you have Lost. Lost is a game changer. Why? Because you don't say, it's a good series. You say, it's an experience. Again, experience. Why? Have you ever tried, I don't know, how many Lost lovers are there in the room? Okay, have you ever tried to say to a friend who never saw one episode of Lost why it is so compelling? They say, oh, so what? Because it is experiential. There is no way somebody who is out of the experience of Lost can understand the passion that this story is able to raise in our soul, in our imagery. But this is the television which is growing, but something else was growing. The internet, the fan clubs, the social media. And that allows for a series of new stuff. What? 2008, a book which has made a history by now, and the title is Convergent Culture. Eric Jenkins says, there is no way that today the viewer, the traditional viewer, the one who lives in the paradigm, I watch, you tell. I'm passive, interacting actively with you only on a psychological level, and you tell the story. Then I'll decide what to do. He says there is no way that the new audiences are going to stay still and listen. They want to have to do with the story world that is being represented. There is a famous episode which is narrated by Clay Shirky in his book. It's a very good book. It's Surplus, Cognitive Surplus. And it's all that we do without knowing while we use internet and we work on internet. And he says this episode, which is simple to get. We are in 2007, 12 years ago. He says, I was watching a movie on my sofa with my little girl, my daughter, who is 5 years old. And there was a advertising, a publicity break. So she stands up and she runs behind the television set. And I say, where are you going? The remote control is here. And she was, rummaging among the cables. He doesn't understand what he's doing. He says, Mary, if you want the remote control, it's in my head. And she says, no, I don't want that. What do you want? I want a mouse. A mouse? Because 5 years old, she already wanted to interject her action in what she was watching. not enough to watch something, she wanted to interact. She wanted to intervene actively in the fictional world. That is the start of the paradigm shift. At the same time, new ways of storytelling start to be generated. There is a period which is last 5-6 years, from 2008 to 2014. That is where I want to go, to 2014. And it's called Transmedia storytelling, which is widely being studied by Harry Jenkins, the same guy. There are memorable products which not only tell you the story, but on the side media, they ask for different level of public participation, just online or in the street. The street teams are organized to do some kind of action, some kind of mission that is acting directly on the story world. One of the most famous is the Swedish, produced by Swedish television, and it's called The Truth About Marika. Marika is a woman who has disappeared from morning to night. His husband is desperate, 5 episodes, 1 hour and a half each. And these 5 episodes tell the story of how she disappeared and what her husband does in search of her. But meanwhile, this is always scripted. It's part of the project. There is imagine for Italians here, they know what I'm talking to, that there is, during the broadcast of the episodes, after one of the episodes, there is a Bruno Vespa, a talk show that talks about the event, because there is one girl who says, the producers and the director stole a real story that happened to my friend. And they talked to me, I talked to them, and they stole the story and they made it a fiction. So a big scandal arises, the audience grew up, and everybody is now saying, is that a true story? So somebody really disappeared? So there is a site, and they are going to discover a conspiracy, but there is also another part of the population which is already organized in another site that says, let's help Marika, let's help the Marika husbands to find her. To make a long story short, there is a huge peak in the 5th episode, and when they find out that they had been, in a way, fooled because it was all a story, technically they called it a hoax, no? Una bufala. They were mad, but in any case, they had watched it, in between what is true, what is not. And it was using 3 media, like television, it was using internet, it was using to connect the people, Facebook. So it was already transmedia. Transmedia is defined as dispersing systematically a story world on different media, each one of them telling a part of the story which is not present on the other. This requires, as you can understand, a much more sophisticated viewer, more of a user than a viewer. He is not only watching the TV series, he is actually doing things on the internet, going online on the site and trying to find out clues and traces of how he can help the victim of this story world, which is totally fictitious. Do you have any question? No. I'll go on. That's another story form. That is what I am interested in. What form take stories, and how we tell them, and how technology affects both the shape of the story and the content of the story. There is another element. You have seen for sure, Netflix, an experiment which had been done already in books. You know, the book game, and it was an interactive storytelling film. It is Bandersnatch. Bandersnatch is a very peculiar experiment. If I have to say that it was successful, no. It was not successful. Why? Because it was poorly done, because it was badly conceived, because the audience doesn't want that kind of interactivity. I don't know the answer, must be studied. But Bandersnatch is a story which has different paths of development. And every 3-5 minutes, it submits a binary options to the viewer, and the viewer has to choose if to go left or to go right. Actually, it was not left or right. It should have been pure. No, because the option appears in terms of, I have 2 brands of cereals. Which one do you want? Kellogg or Pop Mix? So it was, of course, algorithmized so that they found out that the audience, we don't know if because they wanted to try a path versus the other, and they had chosen Kellogg versus Pop Mix. And this is useful for the financiers of the story. But the problem is that the choices were very elementary and a little bit cheap. The problem is that you have many options, and the whole story world is about between 5 and 9 storylines. You have at least 5 endings, and you have 520 minutes shot, original material shot, divided in 250 segments, that you can organize like an IKEA library in different combinations, and you get different results and different character development. It was a little code as an experiment, but this is another story, shape, different from the one we mentioned before. There is even another one, 2018, last year. This was last year as well. Bandersnatch is still on Netflix. Take a watch. If you want to watch the whole film, there is a normal length. If you don't intervene, it's 90 minutes. There is a shorter version, which is 40 minutes. But if you want to try all of them, you have something around 7 hours of material to watch if you want to restudy. On the net, you can find the map of the different paths and the branching of the story. This is another shape of the story. There's one more, and then we get finally to your beloved virtual reality. There is a Transmedia pioneer, which is called Lance Weiler. He teaches now, and he has a lab at the Columbia University, and he launched this particular form of storytelling, which is participatory storytelling. Participatory storytelling means that he launched, since Sherlock Holmes copyrights decayed a couple of years ago. This is why you are seeing so much Sherlock Holmes on television, because there are no rights to pay. They're free. You can do whatever you want with Sherlock Holmes. It's a free franchise. And he said, okay, we are all Sherlock Holmes. So I launched worldwide a project of storytelling participatory. You are going to do the story. And it's called Sherlock Holmes and the IoT, Internet of Things. He organizes in the world groups of 7 people. They all bring on the crime scene where there is a corpse, some object of their own, and they put it on the ground. And then they have, with the object that she brought, that you brought, that she brought, and she brought, we have to reconstruct a possible story about that corpse in order to catch the murderer. This project, up until now, participated 70 countries, 2,000 people. We, in Italy, are, in a way, out of the loop. I don't know why. There must be a reason, but we're out. Very interesting because people start to connect and to start to think in terms of story development. All of these stories, from the beginning around the fire up until now, all these shapes of story have pointed toward one element, which is common to everybody. Can you get it? Interaction, immersion, participation. All of these forms of story and the way they are told point toward one element, and the element is you, the viewer. The viewer becomes the center of a huge amount of attention. Why? Because there is no way, once that the VR comes up, that you can conceive a story or a world in the same terms as you did for cinema. 50 years ago, during the auteurs' time, actually more, 60 years ago, there were directors who could say, I don't care what the audience thinks about my work, I just put it out there. It's my stuff, who cares? There's no way you can think about a VR story world in this way. The whole world that you want to tell is built exactly around the person, around the viewer, around the user. You do whatever choice you do around the viewer, because he is at the center. How many of you have seen at least one VR with a visor? At the mount? Okay, so you know more or less what I'm talking about. Not all of you, strange. But when we talk about virtual reality, we talk about a story form that instead of having what they call the flatty, no, because it's two-dimensional, like a screen, actually like our view, which is bidimensional, and it's all an effect of perspective if you dig in. If you wear one headset, immediately you find yourself in a spherical environment, not because the scene is a sphere, but because you can look everywhere you want, everywhere you want. In front of you, behind you, on the left, on the right, up, down. There is only a blind spot down, because that is where the rig, which is the name of the system of camera, 6 cameras at least, where you can reproduce, tying the different angles of shooting in one environment which is complete. Now the problem is, okay, if the viewer is not anymore sitting in front of a screen, he is in the middle of the scene, how am I going to conceive the story? How am I going to conceive the world where the action happens? This is a problem. I cannot write a script as it was. Actually, Final Draft, which is the most used app to write scripts, has already done so they call it a sphere drama format. Because in the same scene, you have to write what happens in front of you, what happens behind, up and down. It doesn't really work. It sounds still a little stiff. But to make you understand that the perspective of screenwriting has completely changed, this is what's happening. So when you conceive a story for VR, the logic, it's not just a story. Many say, you cannot tell a story through VR. Usually, you can offer a situation. That means that you can invite your viewer, who is wearing the headset, into an experience. experience is back. Because instead of being as it at cinema, that you watch a story unraveling in front of your eyes, then you go home and say, okay, it was good, it left me this. But there are two separate moments. In VR, you actually are there. So if something happens, you are experiencing on your body. There's not much advancement yet in terms of story development, but there are a few. Why? Because the main category of thinking, when you think of VR worlds, is presence. You cannot forget yourself. You cannot forget that you are there, that things move around you. Either it is you with a visor, or it is you through an avatar. But it's you. So, problem for the writer. What am I going to do with this big presence of a human being who is the one I wrote the story for? Because if there is nobody watching a VR experience, it doesn't happen, of course. What do I write? What do I do? That's the main question. Presence is the main issue. There are two meanings of presence. One is the viewer's presence, that he cannot forget about its presence. When you are at the movies, sometimes you fall asleep, sometimes you look around and you see the one on your left, the one on your right. When you have a headset on, you cannot do anything of that because you are there. And you can turn right, but you see something that belongs to the world, and it looks like your world. But it's not the one who is sitting near you, who probably is wearing another headset and is doing his own trip into this experience. So the problem is that presence is the first one. The immersion is total because all of your perception, all of your senses are completely replaced with information which are not false, but they are virtual. You see different landscape, you see different location from the one you are in. You hear noises, of course, we are used to that, but there are also now haptic sensors that is to give you tactile feelings. So your whole system of perception is replaced by something which is not there, but still you can see and touch and hear. This is the shift. The viewer is the center of the narration. But now, last category I need to conceive a story, and the story world for the viewer is this. Okay, I got the viewer, he has his headset on, now what am I gonna do? What he is gonna do? So I have to figure out, to imagine stories that in the writing, in the conception, are able to offer an agency to the viewer. Agency meaning the things that he can/must do. What can you do? And what am I offering you to do? I did, for example, a VR experience with my gloves. I could pick up coins and insert them in a box, and something was happening in the left wall. I could shoot somebody who was attacking me. I could walk under the sea, and I could caress a dolphin. You see, the whole system of perception, my senses are being answered. That is made in the conception of the world. This is good. Still, we have some limitations. The technology is not very advanced. The headset is very heavy. After a while, it gives you nausea because you feel uneasy, because you know that you are not in that world. You are on this, but the discrepancy between the two worlds creates feelings of uneasiness and dizziness. there is one more element to be considered. Now, the best way to use, from my point of view, with the technology at the stage of today, the VR is, for example, in the documentary. If you go in a place where you cannot really move things around and you want just to witness a situation, war, civil riots, for example, today in Iran, you can have a rig, 6 cameras disposed so to create a sphere, and you can show 360 degree, actually there are more, but 360 degree all around, and you can do a documentary about what's happening there. 2, very much in healthcare, you can use for surgery, to teach, or to show. 3rd, the one that from my point of view, which is interest in art, I think that what they are doing now in the museum to have the painting, the famous painting, be explored virtually is one of the best things I have seen. There is one famous painting which is very infamous actually because it was favored by Hitler too, but it is a beautiful painting. There is nothing I can do about it. And it's The Island of the Dead by Böcklin. Do you know it? There is this island when a boat is arriving. And they've done a wonderful VR experience when you start inside a house, then slowly, wall after wall, the house is submerged and all around there is sea. And you start to move in the water, very slowly, very steadily. And you can look around and all you see is ruins of ancient civilizations, and broken palaces, royal palaces, fallen, up until when you see there, and there is the isle that is waiting for you, and it's the Island of the Dead. It's a beautiful experience. Go on YouTube and you will see a trailer which gives you a feeling of it. It's very good. That is one of the best uses I have ever seen. And they are using a lot in museums. What is the real problem here is story. Can I tell a story? And if I have to tell a story, must it be contained within the frame of 20 minutes, because after that, my viewer starts to feel bad, feel sick. That is a problem. But the next step, and this is the way I want to finish because there are other people coming in, but we'll have time for a couple of questions. It's something that is already almost ready. And it's, I don't know if you have ever seen the, let's say, virtual reality chamber, where you project on a similar rig 6 projectors. So this room becomes a sphere where there are different things. You don't see these walls anymore. You don't see these. You can be on a beach and all around is, you know, sand and water and palms, and you can move around. That is hologram. And I don't need the headset because that is the damnation now. Even if they are investing tons of millions to make it light, still not there. So the hologram is the next step. You have seen something of the kind when you saw probably the film Hair. Have you seen Her? Okay, when he is at in his house and he's lonely and he starts a game and the room is a sitting room transforms into the entrance of a cave, and he has an avatar with a kind of pet, and he moves his hands like this and he moves inside the cave and go and go and go. And he's in his room, which is a little bit tight, but the cave is another environment. That is probably our future. So I do believe that the VR potential for storytelling and to create emotions and to create presence and experience, aesthetic experience, because that is what is lacking now. We have experience, but the beauty, it's not yet there. They have nice shots, they have long shots because the medium forces you in using only long shots. You cannot cut. In fact, the montage, the cutting is not called like that. It's called stitching, because you have to stitch like a bruise. You have to stitch together long shots. You cannot fragment the long shot. So I hope that, I think that this stage of virtual reality technology is not yet there. But I do believe that we need to start to think now as cinema lovers, cinema makers, cinema writers, to how to think stories that can happen and how to use the technology to tell compelling stories. Thank you.